concerned is to pay attention to the cultural aspects of our conversation for today. And then next Monday, we will get to really more into depth about different cultural views of mental illnesses in our modern times, is kind of how we'll wrap this section up as far as our class is concerned. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up our presentation. So again, if I remember right, this is kind of where we left off as far as our definition and what we used again as our definition for mental disorders is the definition that comes out of the DSM, which is the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. So this is a diagnostic book that is written by an American Western association in determining what would be considered a mental illness versus what's not a mental illness. Okay. And as mentioned on Monday, just as a review, according to this Western view of abnormality, when we're dealing with mental disorders, we're talking about a cluster of abnormal behaviors that are deviant, distressful, and persistent over time. And probably most important is the maladaptive aspects. It prevents us from being able to do those things that make us adaptive to our world, such as be involved in our work, be involved in social relationships, be involved in different belief systems such as religious and political um, um, areas. And so those are really the areas that we look for, at least from I don't use the term professional Western perspective. Okay. Also, along those lines, there are different kind of theories and whatnot that we look at. Um, and we do, and I think we kind of noted on Monday that we do need to pay attention about the difference between mental health and mental illness. Okay. Just like physical health, a person can have very poor mental health, but not have a diagnosable disorder. Okay. So, just like physical health, however, with that being said, poor mental health, just like poor physical health, does increase the probability of contracting a mental disorder or a physical disorder of some type, depending on what we are. And usually, when we look at these different areas, we look at it from what's called the biopsychosocial model. That whether we're talking about physical health or mental health, there's always going to be a biological component, a psychological, the way we think about it and we think about ourselves, and a social aspect. Okay. So, on the biological level, on physical health, we can look at healthy diet, exercise, abstaining from toxins. And similarly, with mental health, we should be looking at things like a healthy diet, exercise, especially the brain and mental capacity, and again, abstaining from toxins. And indeed, a lot of replicated research is actually showing that we might actually have two brains, one in the stomach and one in the head, because we're finding that the microbes in the stomach really do influence our mental health. And so even on the mental health level, healthy diets and those kinds of things become important. Okay. On the psychological end, very similar to each other again, we find that people who tend to have better physical and mental health have what's called a growth mindset, meaning that they understand that they're not fixed, that they can change, they can become something better than where they are right now. They have a healthy level of self esteem, they think well of themselves, and they have levels of what's called self efficacy. Self efficacy is the belief that you can accomplish some type of task or some type of situation. So, for example, with physical health, self-efficacy is the belief that you can make it to the gym 3 days a week and that you can do that. For mental health, it might be something such as being able to read or being able to accomplish some mental task of some type. Um, on the mental health side, we also look at things like thought engaging activities and open mindedness, we tend to find is associated with positive mental health. Okay. On the social level, we find that again, on both ends, we find that people who have both physical and mental health have engaging social worlds. They don't avoid the world outside of their home. They engage on the physical end, they engage in both preventative and regular medical care. On the mental health, they have a strong sense of identity and belonging. They maintain healthy, intimate, and social relations. And they also engage in preventative social activities and medical and follow through with medical care. Okay, so on our end, this is again, and if you look at this, this is very much a Western idea. We reduce our health to three basic concepts: biology, psychology, and social aspects, and we reduce it to these little areas. Okay, um, and we'll see later on that other societies see this as more of a holistic view instead of a reductionist view. Okay, we're going to skip this because that's more for, okay. Now let's talk about some of the belief systems about abnormality or about people with mental illnesses, okay? And when it comes to this first theory, it's called moral corruption theory. We actually find this theory across a lot of ancient cultures, not only in the Western view, but we see several indigenous communities here in the Americas that followed this idea. Um, but it is the basic belief that a person who has a mental illness lacks some type of moral fortitude, that they're weak minded, quote unquote. And that is what allowed them to become mentally ill. If we look at it from a Western perspective, it was weak mindedness that allowed someone to be possessed by demons and act out. It was the weak minded who became the witches during the witch hunt eras. Um, when we look more of the indigenous areas of of especially the Americas, going into the Australian areas, there was this influence by bad spirits that created individuals and persuaded them to act um, in a manner that they acted in. So this moral corruption theory we kind of see throughout many histories across cultures to be a common theme when explaining abnormality. Okay. Um, I'm thinking one early theory of treatment, therefore, that we can see both if we look here, and this is the Americas, and then we look at Western culture, was this notioning of trephining. Okay. Trephining is a method that was believed to release evil spirits, to get them out of the individuals. So, how do you get a bad spirit out of someone? Well, you drill a hole at the very top of the person's body, and then that releases that evil spirit. Okay, and trephining was a common form of treatment for mental illnesses throughout, especially the Dark Ages in Western cultures, and during a similar time period here in the Americas. Okay, now trafficking did actually turn into something that was productive, but let me just first explain: was trafficking an effective method of treating mental illness. From a pure observational perspective, yes, it was. Because usually what would happen is they would drill that hole in the top of the head, and then the brain would become infected by a bacteria or a viral infection, which made the person very lethargic, very not quite there. And so their behaviors looked very much like they were healed from that evil spirit. But also because of the infection, they would die pretty quickly after the trephining technique took place. We're talking a couple weeks or so, because of the infection that it caused. And therefore, that person was then released to God, but the bad spirit was released first, and then the person went back to God, and it was in now his grace. Okay. So if you take it from a pure observational perspective, that's what they saw. If you take it from, would you want to be a person who received a trephine? I highly doubt it, because I'm sure it was a very painful death in the end. Now, one thing that we should know is a form of trephining has happened clear up even through the Vietnam era, the Vietnam War, because what we did find is that military individuals who got a percussion type of injury, a TBI, if they trephined it, most individuals don't die from traumatic brain injury because of the initial shock of an assault. Usually, what happens is that people die from a traumatic brain injury because of the swelling that occurs. And basically, the brain squishes itself inside the skull. And so, what they found is using this early method of treatment of mental illness is if you drilled a hole in the top of their head after an injury, the brain would swell out and it wouldn't crush itself within the skull. And so this method on the battlefield was used clear up through the Vietnam era, to prevent someone dying from a TBI. Now, in our modern era, what they do is they just put their head in a big basic refrigerator, because they found that you don't need to let it swell out. You need to stop the swelling. So they basically pack your head in ice in our modern times, and they give you a bunch of anti-inflammatory medications, so they don't have to drill a hole in the top of your head. Anyways, that's how it's treated today. So my point being, though, is even though it probably was not an effective treatment of mental illness, it probably has saved thousands of people from dying from a traumatic brain injury, even if that was not the original intention of this method. Okay. Um, we're going to skip this. This is just an kind of a modern example of trephining, but we don't need to look at that. Some other early theories of mental illnesses that we found in Western history that still have kind of followed us through today is what's known as the Greek humor theory, which then led to what's called cathartic release. Okay. The Greek humor theory is basically if you call someone humorous, you're telling them that their body fluids don't look the correct color that they should. So, for example, if a person has yellow bile, that meant that they're depressed or they have a bad temperament. Oh, no, bad temperament, or they're very colicky. If they have black bile, that means that they're sad or depressed. If they had a lot of phlegm, they were unemotional, or a lot of sanguine, they were very optimistic or positive. Okay. So the Greek humor theory, where we get the term humor, is from this idea that the body fluids within the body can tell us something about the mental condition of the person. Okay. Now, just like trephining, what do you do with this type of theory? Well, it was believed that a mental illness was caused by a buildup of body fluid. So one popular form of treatment for someone with mental illness was something called bloodletting. They basically put you on a table and they poke something kind of up into your spine and they would let blood drain out of the body. Okay. And just like trephining, um, if you took it from a pure um, observational perspective, meaning you're observing from the outside, this was a very effective treatment. The problem is that yes, so they would become non-psychotic, they become non-trauma, non-hysterical, but it wasn't because you were treating the hysteria or the psychosis. It's that through the bloodletting process, you let so much blood out of their body that they were on the brink of death. And so, yes, it would look like you cured them because they were no longer being hysterical or psychotic. Okay. All right. Some things about this theory, because if you look at this, I'm sure you probably kind of laugh at it and whatnot. Um, Although bloodletting is in its original form, the idea of bodily fluids telling us something about the body's condition is still with us today. So, for example, when you go to your doctor and you have some symptoms, more than likely that doctor is going to have you either pee in a cup or take some blood out. They're going to put it in a little machine and they're going to say, based upon what your blood is telling us, you have this condition, whether it be high blood sugar or something else. So if you think that we have left the idea of the Greek humor theory behind, it still is very much part of modern medicine and how we still diagnose a lot of health conditions based upon the composition of a person's bodily fluids. Okay. And while there is very few kind of blood tests and whatnot for mental illnesses that we can find, we can still look at this humor theory on some of the theories about therapy and about the therapeutic process known as cathartic release. Okay. The best way to explain cathartic release is when people go to treatment, about 80% of individuals only go to the first and second session of therapy, and then they stop going. Okay. And we've wanted to know why. Is it because of the therapist? Did they not find it useful? Did they not connect with it? And so we went back and we've interviewed people who stopped going after about the first or second session. And what we found is that for the majority of people who stop going to treatment after the first or second session, it's because they didn't have those symptoms anymore. Their depressive symptoms, their anxiety symptoms went away. Okay. And it was kind of explained like this by the participants that were interviewed. They said it was the first time in their life that someone said, anything you tell me will be confidential between you and me. You can tell me anything you want. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to criticize you. I'm going to sit here and just listen to you. And just by having that opportunity to just let everything go in a non-judgmental, confidential setting, a lot of individuals get relief from their depressive, traumatic, or anxiety symptoms. Okay. And this is the notion of cathartic release. that just by letting out all of that emotional pain and that emotional things that are built up, that in our regular day-to-day life we get feared that we're going to be judged for, this seems to be very therapeutic. Now, you'll notice this little sign on the right-hand side. It says fact or fiction. Well, one theory that came out of this was a theory about anger and about people who have anger outbursts, and it was what's called the bottleneck theory. Okay, and that is that people build up anger and anger and anger until they can't hold it in anymore, and it bursts out in an anger moment. They just can't control it anymore. And so early theories on anger management was that they needed to have this cathartic release, that they needed in a safe environment just to be angry and let all that anger out. Okay. This is where this theory does not hold up so well. We actually find that giving a person space to be angry and to let their anger out actually makes them more anger and more volatile. Why? Because they remember why they're angry, and that makes them more angry. Um, and so, does cathartic release work for things like depressive symptoms, anxiety symptoms, trauma symptoms? It seems to help. Does it help with things like high arousal emotions such as anger? Not so much. It actually makes a person more angry than before. Okay. Now, with that being said, in a lot of anger management treatments, we do find that it is effective to let out the physical aspect of anger. Hence, when we talk with couples, and the couples can't communicate anymore because they're angry with each other, we have them go do some physical activity separate from each other for a while and then come back together. But the idea of yelling and screaming about their anger, that tends to make them more angry. But having a physical outlet relieves the physiological aspects of anger. Okay. So here we have on the mental health end of this humor theory that it works with certain conditions of having a cathartic release, but again, highly arousal situations, it kind of makes it actually the problem worse, as you would say. Okay, so that's a Western theory that still holds up today. As I hope we're more scientific about it and we understand our blood composition better than we did back in the BCs of Greek. But the humor theory is still a theory that we use to diagnose and treat at least physical illnesses. Um, I want to bring up one area of the moral corruption theory that really has had an influence on Western thought as far as not only our ideas about people who have a mental illness, or I should say, our stereotypes about people with mental illnesses, but also the idea of expertise. Okay. And this is the moral corruption theory that came out of the witch hunts in Europe in the 1300s through the 1600s, and then later on here in the Americas. You probably heard of Salem and those places as well. Um, what was happening during this time is you have a lot of plagues going on. You have a lot of social upheaval, economic upheaval, competition for resources as our population started to skyrocket, and people started to look for people to blame for their situation, for what's going on in their farm, going on in their family, and whatnot. And they found it in this idea of the witch, people who are unpacked with the devil and were doing seances and stuff to make the person have the bad luck that they were having. Okay. Um, and we could probably have a whole entire class on this topic. Um, but I just want to fast forward and summarize what did the witch hunts actually end up representing in, for example, our modern legal system and our modern era of mental health services. Um, is that during this time, there was a large movement towards uh, scientificizing religious beliefs and ideas. That religion and science were not seen as two divisive things, that we could use the tools of science in the practice of understanding God and religion. Okay, so there was a huge secular movement that was going on during the time. Okay, and what people wanted to do with the witch hunts is to make sure that there was a systematic system to assure that the court or the clergy, that they were not going to burn, for example, the stake a woman or a man who was innocent of witching. Now, they were all innocent, or we'll just leave it at that. But at that time, I just want to put you in their mindset. And so this is where we start to develop in the court systems the idea of expert witnesses. Okay. That people who were highly trained would come in and assess the individual and provide the court with their expert testimony of whether that individual was a witch or not a witch. Okay. And in this, there was books that were written. Probably one of the most popular expert male professions was the witch pricker. This was an individual that would come into a person, they would lay him on the table, they would strip them naked, they would shave all of their hair away, and they would look for, this is where the idea of the picker comes from, they would look for the sign of the devil, which was usually some birthmark or some irregular shape on the skin, and they go, aha, there's the mark of the devil, she's a witch. You could probably imagine this was a male-oriented field. What the psychological drives behind becoming a witch pricker actually were. But anyways, that's a story for a different class. But this idea that you have experts come into a court system or into a system and provide their expert testimony about the condition of another human being. This started with the witch hunts. Okay. And if you think we've gotten better with expert testimonies and expert opinions, the thing that I would challenge you is usually you will have two people with the same exact education, seeing the same exact people in their clinical or their forensic practices. But amazingly, these individuals with the same amount of education, the same amount of expertise, will come to two completely different conclusions dependent upon whether they're being paid by the defense attorney or by the prosecuting attorney. Okay, so so my point though being is that you can imagine that this is the idea of having an expert come in, but we always have to remember that there's motives beyond expertise that will motivate the conclusion that a person draws to in order to convict or create innocence in an individual. Okay. And this all started with the witch hunts. Okay. I bring this up because it kind of informs us about our modern legal systems. The other thing that I would focus on is you got to remember that these people were not seen as people who had an illness. They were damaged by corruption. They had weak moral fortitudes. And this feeds into the stereotype about a person who has depression or anxiety. They must be a weak person. They must, there's something wrong with them. They're just not as strong as everyone else. And this very much still feeds into our stereotypes and our biased beliefs behind mental illness, even today, about people who have symptoms of a mental illness. And so this still drives a lot of those beliefs and ideas within the Western society today. I do want to just also mention we've mentioned that there are moral corruption theories within a lot of cultures that we see, but we do see some differences when we come to, for example, a lot of Native American tribes and a lot of other indigenous tribes that we've studied, is that they're kind of more on the end of disharmony theory. Okay, that really dysfunction arises from disharmony between the person and nature, um, and that what needs to be focused on is the person's journey through life. Okay, and what we do see within quite a few of these different communities is that the community really is about the individual. Okay, that the community needs to take responsibility for that person who is mentally ill or mentally challenged. Okay, and so this is a little bit of a differentiation between a lot of the moral corruption theories we see heavily in Western cultures. But here, again, we see this flavor of this disharmony between the person and nature. Okay. All right. Let me think of where I'm going with this one. Okay. Okay. All right. I think that's what I wanted to get through today. Let me. Okay. So that